Hey, what's going on, y'all? Eric Moldry here with Code Red Conversations. Thanks for joining me today. Today's video is going to be a response to a Black Lives Matter video where they discuss their stance perspective on defunding the police. I'm going to be showing the entire video or a good portion of the video. I'm going to stop when and where I think is necessary to respond. Hold on to your butts on this one, y'all.
Hey y'all, what's up? So, can I tell you something? We've been talking a lot about defund the police. You've probably heard a lot of people talking about it, and I've been hearing people ask, well, what does it mean? I don't get it. Or it's complicated and it's confusing. It's not really confusing, but let's talk about it.
Okay, so in this clip here, they post a image here that says more than 1,000 men and women are killed by the police in the United States every single year, and thousands more are brutalized and abused. The police are out of control. Now I have a couple of issues right there. There's no clarification, there's no clarity on who they're talking about. Again, this is Black Lives Matter, so they're making this wholesale claim. They're not distinguishing between police shootings involving suspects in possession of weapons, knives, guns, firearms, any of that. They're just making a claim and they're throwing it out there without any supporting evidence. Do the police kill roughly 1,000 people every year? Yeah. But are you aware that the data from various sources, whether it be the CDC, the FBI Uniform Crime Report, or even the Washington Post, demonstrates or shows that anywhere from 85 to 90% of those individuals that the police shoot every year or police kill every year are in possession of a firearm or in possession of some form of a weapon. You probably haven't heard that before because this is the kind of rhetoric that you typically get. Now, are there abuses of power? Anybody that watches any one of my videos, or if you're new to my channel, let me make it very clear. Yes, that there are problems with some officers. I'm not going to try to say it's 1% or 2% because I really, truly don't know. But I do know that any abuse of authority is too much and it does need to be addressed. I'm not out here to make a wholesale, well, there's no issue whatsoever. I'd be lying to you if I did. But there's a problem already just jumping into the first minute or first 30 seconds of their video. Then it says, to address police brutality, electeds decided, I'm sure they're talking about politicians, decided to spend millions more on police reform, quote unquote, to teach the police how to behave. Okay, if we look at the data from the history of our country in the area of policing and police changes, you will see, not listening to the rhetoric, but you will see a clear transformation in the amount of police killings that have taken place over the years. Let me share a little bit of information with you. This is from a report entitled Dispelling the Myths Surrounding Police Use of Force by Richard Johnson, PhD. And I believe he's part of an organization called the Dolan Group, where they study police statistics. But this is what they said. Prior to 1985, few judicial decisions limited police use of force, and it was the law of the land that police officers could shoot someone simply for fleeing the commission of a felony, such as a burglary, drug dealing, or a theft. Most departments back then lacked a written use of force policy. As a result, officer-involved shootings were far more prevalent 3 or 4 decades ago. For instance, in 1971, the New York City Police Department alone had 1,562 officer-involved shootings. So basically 4.2 per day. And the Philadelphia Police Department had 78 shootings, 1.5 per week, even though the U.S. population was 36% smaller than it is today. Comparing those numbers to the Washington Post estimate of approximately 1,000 deaths from police uses of force, with a third larger U.S. population, reveals that police use of lethal force, is only a fraction of what it was in previous decades. Will you hear that from BLM? What do you think? Let's move on.
So a lot of people are asking, well, why defund the police? Why not police reform? So We've tried that. We've tried police reform over many, many years, and still it stays the same.
No, it doesn't. As I just demonstrated, no, it does not stay the same. Those are the facts.
We've tried to figure out different ways to train police. Still, things stay the same. Still to this day, right now, every year, over 1,000 men, women, and children are killed by police. It's out of control.
It worries me that at no point so far have I heard any conversation of individual accountability. None whatsoever. And you'll see that, and you'll hear that over and over again in recent dialogues, recent discussions, when you hear politicians or activists or whatever title they want to use at times talk about these issues. Ask yourself, when was the last time you heard someone reference personal accountability? I'm pretty sure it'll be few and far between. So in this next image, she says, defunding the police is the only way to stop pouring resources into a system that does not make us safe. I'm sure we'll get more into that here shortly.
So that's what people are saying, just maybe defund the police, because it's really not working. It's a system that is built on harming Black people. Black people are being targeted disproportionately.
Black folks are being targeted unfairly or disproportionately. If that's true, could there be any reasons why that's taking place? Could it be the fact that a small percentage of less than 6% of the population are responsible for such a disproportionate amount of crime? Could that have anything to do with the fact that there seems to be an appearance of the police targeting members of the Black community? Is that even remotely possible? Do you even consider that to be real? Or are you just looking to make an excuse for bad behavior? I've worked those areas. I policed those areas. I've lived in the hood before. Sometimes I really wonder what some of these people, what lives these people lived. These people who are out here advocating for these destructive policies, these deadly policies. I wonder where they lived, or did they just live in the suburbs somewhere and just read a couple of books? Because it doesn't make any sense to me. It boggles my mind.
People are still being killed, with men, women, and children still being killed. So people are saying maybe it's time to divest some of those resources and invest resources in a different way, in a way that redefines what protection really can look like.
So what does protection look like from their perspective? These people out here, these advocates for defunding or abolishing the police, what does that look like? And oftentimes there are a lot of people who don't understand the dynamics that take place inside the hood. The snitches get stitches motto and how powerful that is. I've literally seen people who had their kids shot, they had their houses shot up, who were unwilling to give any information. And I understand why, because there's oftentimes there's a threat to their lives. But what makes them think that it will get any better? Because you have people who live in some of these communities, if that's the plan that they have, who live in some of these communities are the ones who are seeking to offer protection. And do you think that that is above the possibility of corruption? Throughout the years, there have been a consistent amount of checks and balances that have been stacked up to watch over police. I'm glad of that, and justifiably so. Between nowadays, you have just with people having access to their own cameras, you have immediate supervision, you have other officers. For instance, here in Las Vegas, we had a policy of truthfulness at all times. And if you were caught lying, it's pretty much a guarantee that your job is gone. And then you're talking about internal affairs and your state level investigators, all the way up to the Department of Justice. You have so many checks and balances to monitor and watch over what cops do. And if you abolish and defund the police, you're going to have to start all over again. And who's going to watch these people? Who's going to be in charge of them? Who's going to make sure that they have the tactics and the ability and the skill? Who's going to check and ensure that these individual citizens have the ability and the tools to de-escalate properly? Who? One of my many questions. Here she says, we can move our tax money away from harmful policing toward human-centered services that actually work to keep our communities safer and help them thrive. And then she has education, healthcare, housing, and opportunity. Okay, very vague, doesn't really tell us a whole heck of a lot. Education, what are you going to teach people? We already see a lot of money being funded into our school systems, and we're already at the bottom when you look at worldwide. You have kids graduating in Baltimore, LA, all across the nation who can barely read up to standards. And let's move on.
So America spends $100 billion on policing and another $80 billion on incarceration, where Black people are disproportionately targeted.
Once again, totally overlooks the crime rate. Acts like that's nothing to even sneeze at, nothing to even consider, nothing to talk about here, folks. Just move on.
What if we used our tax money to put towards other services like education, like healthcare, like housing, like employment opportunies? In some cities, just by defunding the police by 5% would double the budget for public health.
Want to hear good news? It's possible, and it's happening right now in cities across the country. It's time to take money from the police budgets and put the money into people. It's time to create communities where Black people will not only survive, but thrive. Yeah, it's happening right now. And what are we getting from it? What are we getting? What is the result? What are the results of this defunding, abolishing the police, tying the hands of the police? You're seeing an escalation in crime across the nation. Started back in Ferguson with the quote unquote Ferguson effect, when the police felt as if their hands were tied, and anytime they had a questionable contact with a citizen, they decided, you know what, if I can't do right, so I'm just gonna stop being proactive. And you saw an increase in crime. You see it going on in New York, you see it going on in Atlanta, you're seeing it going on in Chicago. That's what you get as a result of that. You have to be willfully blind in order to overlook these issues.
You know what's cool? It's actually happening. It's happening in cities all across the country, all over the country. People are asking the question, do we really need to invest all of these funds in a system that doesn't work while we're taking funds away from systems that do work, that will help?
Doesn't work. You take the cops away, crime goes up. Recent studies show that cops make over 10 million arrests per year. What is going to happen when the cops are no longer there? You're seeing it, folks. Wake up. Wake up, please. The system can be improved, no question about it. But to act as if the cops have no use, I don't even know what to tell you, if that's your honest belief. Here's how we do it. First, demand the lawmakers support reparations for all families of those killed and survivors of police violence. And once again, no context whatsoever, just make a claim for all those killed and survivors of police violence, reparations. And oftentimes, if it's found to be where the officer was unjustified, or even not, oftentimes when a citizen poses or puts forth a civil suit against officers, they get paid, because most departments would rather settle out of court than take it to trial. That's just the reality of it. Second, demand that every state, city, and municipality spend less on law enforcement and incarceration, period. Most officers would agree on this point, is that there's too much on an officer's plate. We get calls for everything. We get calls for civil complaints, calls for people who are dealing with low-level mental health issues, low-level family issues. We get called for too much, and our level of responsibility is ridiculous at times. But there's always that balance. So I don't think anyone is would disagree on this point. I actually think she makes a good argument. If we knew that these funds could be allocated towards agencies that would send people out into certain communities to be able to address some of these issues and take some of the burden off of police officers, most of us would welcome that change. Finally, demand investment into Black communities. It is not enough to defund the police. We need to put in place systems to uplift and protect Black communities. That means divesting from and investing in police in schools. So no police in schools. I'm hoping you still have some level of security in there. I hope you do, because it's not like you got a bunch of angels in there. Criminalizing mental health and restorative services, that's the response. So let me back up a little bit. So police in schools, so get rid of them. So advocate or allocate more funds towards teachers and counselors. All the money that has been spent on the public education system over the decades. And what positive result are we getting from that? Someone help me out there. But here, blame the cops. They're the problem. So criminalizing mental health, divest in criminalizing mental health, and invest in mental health and restorative services. Clearly, these people have never come across anyone who is violently mentally ill. I've literally had to deal with people who were ripping the veins and tendons out of their arm because they were under the impression that we were going to kill them. I've literally had to deal with people who had knives and weapons towards loved ones because they thought that they were trying to kill them. I've literally had to deal with people who just they're so dangerous that they could not be around other people. There are people out there in our world who are just like that.
The brutal attack unfolded at a Cardinia ATM in March. Sergeant was behaving bizarrely, reaching towards Carmen's back pocket, her worried granddaughter approaching to ask if he'd taken her money. Then he snapped. The court heard the paranoid schizophrenic thought the women were witches who'd used sorcery to rob him. The assault part of a 3-day rampage while off his medication.
25-1.
Got a subject walking in the middle of the street.
Get a subject description.
Get out of the street. Get out of the street. Get on the ground. Get on the ground. Taser, taser.
So what do you do in that situation? Do you just send a mental health worker in there with a notebook, a pen, and a pad, and just to sit there and talk to them? Sometimes the threat that they bring, it necessitates a higher use of force because they could potentially kill someone. What's the answer, BLM, Black Lives Matter? What's the answer to that? How would you deal with that issue? Remember, cops are defunded. Cops are gone. They're no longer there. Or at the very least, their hands are tied. They can't operate. They can't get the training, the extra training that they need because that money's been allocated other places. There's something to think about before you start throwing out some of these crazy ideas. And lastly, military weapons against citizens, divest, and invest in community-led harm reduction. I really hope that she goes into detail of what that means. Community-led harm reduction. What does that even mean? And if anyone out there has any idea what that means, please comment down below. Please share. I would love to know, because then that could be another area, something else we can talk about. Divest in military weapons against citizens. I'm shocked how quickly we forget the Fort Hood shooting, Pulse nightclub shooting, October 1st here in Las Vegas.
It was like a war zone.
The North Hollywood bank robbery. I can name a bunch more. In those situations, a cop with a sidearm and a low lethal shotgun would not have gotten the job done. We are in a new age. Terrorism is a greater threat than ever. Active shooters. There are a whole host of issues that the police have to address, and they need to be armed and equipped properly.
That's it. That's it. That's the whole thing. That is divesting in police and investing in communities. That is the way we transform.
That's it? That's the whole thing? Please tell me there's more, because I don't think any of these things have been worked out. Yeah, we can rock. I can rock with you on providing more options, taking some of the responsibility away from police officers and having other avenues, especially in dealing with certain low-level issues when it comes to people who have mental health problems and some of the things that I mentioned earlier. But this right here, this ain't gonna cut it.
And it's time to claim healthy, safe futures for our children. It's time to claim healthy, safe futures for our elders and for ourselves.
Tell that to all these young people who have been killed over the last few weekends across the nation. Tell that to the over 80 people who have died during the riots, protests, uprisings, whatever you want to call them. When the police were nowhere to be found because you burned down their precincts, you burned up their cars, burned up their vehicles. Tell that to the parents of those young people, of all these people, not just young and old. Tell that to the family of those people who lost their lives over the last few weeks. I hope people are starting to understand my concern with, one of my many concerns with Black Lives Matter. They throw out a lot of things, like a lot of politicians. They throw out a lot of ideas and concepts that sound good, but in practicality, they are sorely lacking. And that's putting it mildly. These concepts, these ideas are horrible, horrific. And the only thing that'll come is basically what we are currently seeing is more death, more destruction, more harm.
NYPD released shocking surveillance video of a shooting in Brownsville, Brooklyn that killed a man and injured a woman. You can see the suspect walk up to a man last night on New Lots Avenue, pull out a gun, and start firing as people scatter. The gunman then turned and walked away. This happened last night on New Lots Avenue. A 20-year-old man fatally shot in the head. A 36-year-old woman is recovering from gunshots to her arm and torso. So far, no arrests.
Less law enforcement in dangerous places means more killings. There's not much debate about that, at least not among adults. New York City disbanded its plainclothes police unit and cut the funding for the NYPD by $1 billion. The result? Shootings in New York are up more than 200% compared to this time just last year. Murders are up 21%. Burglaries have risen 30%. It is the most dangerous time to live in New York City in a quarter century. Just last night, an infant was shot to death while sleeping in a stroller at a cookout in Brooklyn. Mayor Bill de Blasio, who's almost single-handedly destroyed that city, described the child's murder as so painful. Then de Blasio moved forward with his plans to disable the NYPD. He canceled the hiring of more than 1,000 cops. He announced that police will no longer keep the schools safe. How will this end? We know very well how it will end. More poor children will die. That will not affect Bill de Blasio, though. His family will remain protected by armed security paid for by taxpayers. So will Sandy Cortez, so will Barack Obama, so will the rest of the politicians calling for taking away your protection. They will never suffer the consequences.
But in the end, they are trained Marxists. So I think ultimately that's what they want. But let me know what you guys think. Am I wrong? And if I'm wrong, give me some details why. Don't just say you're wrong. Don't just start name calling. Let me hear some arguments. Let me hear some sort of a dialogue, a rational, sensible dialogue. In the meantime, y'all stay safe, God bless, and make sure you join the conversation.